Hello, my dear Minnow friends. Welcome to the state of menopause in the world today. And I am Menopause Taylor with all my educational tutorials on menopause. If you're new to this podcast, you should know that I basically cover everything. And unlike most podcasts in which it really doesn't matter whether you listen to any podcast in order, mine is somewhat like, I would call it Menopause University. And as with any educational endeavor, the order, the order in which you learn the material really does matter. So, that's like why you had to learn the alphabet before you could learn to read. So I always try to kind of give you an orientation as to where we are, and I deliver the material to you in units in a very organized, carefully planned, specifically ordered way. Because I am frankly a control freak about the order of these podcasts. And the reason is because your entire menopause education depends on your ability to understand absolutely everything. And there's no way you'll understand everything if you approach the material in a chaotic manner. So we just finished a great big unit on heart attack. And now that we're finished with that unit, I want to address some lighter topics before delving into the next big unit, which will be on osteoporosis. So right now, we're going to start a unit on the problems, principles, and powers of menopause management. And this is because I think it's good to just stand back and take a look at the big picture once in a while. And if you've been listening to my podcasts, you know that I address everything on every level. And I do that to make sure you don't get bogged down with just one detail or another. I actually work really hard to ensure that you never lose sight of the fact that your menopause management involves balancing a lot of different factors and choosing the management options that are best for you, with the keywords being for you. So, in the next few podcasts, we're going to address some of the big picture aspects of menopause, and they'll be about the problems, principles, and powers of menopause management. And this first one is entitled Happily Ever After Menopause. In this one, I'm going to discuss how your story can be once upon a time you became menopausal and you lived happily ever after. If you have even one negative thought about menopause, you should definitely listen to this podcast. So, do you remember all the fairy tales you read as a little kid? There was Cinderella, Sleeping Beauty, Beauty and the Beast, and a whole host of others. They all started with once upon a time, and they all ended with, and they all lived happily ever after. They were all whimsical, dramatic, and animated. And as children, we read these stories, and although we know they're stories, there's a part of us that assumes that real life is supposed to turn out the same way, happily ever after. So I want to use this desire for the happily ever after as a central focus for our podcast today. And as juvenile as all this may sound so far, I assure you that it won't remain so. You see, the problem with these fairy tales is that they set us up for wanting to be the fairest of them all, the beauty, and to remain so forever, which in a fairy tale is precisely how we'll manage to live happily ever after. These stories end when the pretty protagonist is still fertile, vibrant, sexy, and premenopausal. I have yet to find a fairy tale about a young protagonist who transitions through menopause but remains the fairest of them all and lives happily ever after. But when you get to menopausal age, that's exactly what you want. And I'm here to tell you that it's possible for you to achieve it, and how. And if you learn what I have to teach you by listening to all my podcasts in order, or watching all my videos in order, or reading my book, or having a consultation with me, you really can live happily ever after. There are many steps on the path that leads to a happily ever after menopause. And I want to present them all because each of us has a role to play in setting the stage for a happily ever after menopause for all the females we know. So, your once upon a time starts When your mother sits you down as a preteen to have a little talk, this is when she teaches you about the birds and the bees, as they say. I never understood why people referred to sex as the birds and the bees. Usually, this conversation between mother and daughter is a warning about the inevitable first period. In essence, it's when your mother tells you that you're about to enter your reproductive phase of life. And I think it's great for every mother to have this conversation with her daughters. In some cultures, there's a lot more than just a conversation. Just think of all the rituals and celebrations and rites of passage that come with puberty. In some cultures, puberty marks the greatest and most celebrated achievement of all. It's the beginning of a happily ever after existence. But why is it that mothers tell their daughters only about the beginning of their reproductive life and end the conversation with a happily ever after as if that's all there is? The fact is that that's not all there is. There's an end to your reproductive life, and it's called menopause. So why don't moms prepare you for both? All a mom has to say is, honey, pretty soon you're going to begin your reproductive life. And when you're about 50, you're going to end your reproductive life. It's all one big circle, and you'll live happily ever after. If you only learn about the beginning of your reproductive life and nothing beyond that, you assume that you're doomed when it ends. You're not doomed because of menopause. You can still live happily ever after. Just think about how differently you would embrace menopause if you had first heard about it as the bookend to your first period. If you had known that your reproductive life was not your happily ever after, you might have even looked forward to menopause. Okay, then the next issue is preparation. How much of your life did you spend being pregnant? And how much of your life did you prepare for pregnancy? I'm going to guess that you spent somewhere between 9 and 45 months of your entire life being pregnant. That would amount to between 1 and 5 pregnancies. But in the big picture of life, it really isn't that much time. Nevertheless, you probably made plans to get pregnant, rejoiced when you discovered that you were pregnant, read books about being pregnant, pondered baby names while you were pregnant or even before, shopped for the best obstetrician for your pregnancy, went to the doctor's office multiple times while pregnant, talked a lot about being pregnant, went to birthing classes while pregnant, bought all sorts of baby furniture and baby accessories while you were pregnant, learned everything you could about the best diet while pregnant, took the very best care of yourself while pregnant, asked questions about your options for delivery, researched the pros and cons of various types of pain relief during labor, created a birth plan, assessed the different hospitals for delivery, etc., etc., etc. See what I mean? And having a child is definitely viewed as part of one's happily ever after. It's one of the most joyous events in life, despite all the things about pregnancy and childbirth that we really don't like, such as the awful morning sickness, the painful breasts, that bloated feeling before you ever even gain weight, the actual weight gain, the leaking of urine, the physical discomfort of carting around an extra 35 pounds, the varicose veins, the hemorrhoids, the long, intense pain of labor, the risks associated with pregnancy and delivery themselves, like, blood clots, high blood pressure, heavy bleeding, even death. Despite all of that, you perceived the entire event as part of your happily ever after, and you poured yourself into the pregnancy and subsequent parenthood with a very positive outlook for your future. And you probably talked about it afterwards as one of the greatest things that has ever happened to you. The planning and preparation you put into pregnancy probably encompassed the majority of your time, all for a very small portion of your life. How much preparation did you put into anticipating menopause? Let's see. Menopause will constitute 1/2 to 1/3 of your entire life. Did you plan for it? Did you prepare in advance for it? Do you see it as part of your happily ever after? Did you embrace it positively? Did you learn as much as you could about it before it hit you over the head like a ton of bricks? Did you talk about it beforehand? Do you talk about it now? Have you considered it a time to take the best possible care of yourself and eat the best diet? Do you see the difference? Why would you ignore the longest and most important phase of your life? Happily ever after doesn't just happen. You have to create it. If you fail to prepare for your menopausal life, it probably won't end with, and she lived happily ever after. And what about symptoms? Let's see, you had a long list of symptoms when you went through puberty. If you don't recall, just ask your parents. You had mood swings and irritability, depression and cravings for sweets and carbs and weight gain and acne and increased sex drive and headaches and inability to concentrate on anything but boys. And you grew boobs, pubic and axillary hair, and you started your periods. Sure, you didn't like some of these things at first, but you got used to them and considered them normal. And you embarked on your happily ever after for that portion of your life. And what about symptoms during pregnancy? When you were pregnant, did you feel wonderful? Let's see, most women have a whole host of unpleasant symptoms during pregnancy that mimic those of menopause, including heat intolerance, night sweats, insomnia, fatigue, mood swings, irritability, cravings for just about anything, breast pain, urinary problems, and weight gain. Were you ashamed of those symptoms, or did you laugh about them? What I'm getting at here is attitude. Why is it that most women have a positive attitude about puberty and pregnancy, but a negative attitude about menopause? Why is it that we celebrate puberty and pregnancy, but deny, ignore, and minimize menopause? There's no way you can have happily ever after if you shun the very thing that will constitute your ever after. In listening to women talk about menopause, I hear a lot of words that imply martyrdom. You know, actions and choices that involve accepting misery as if it's a badge of honor or something. I hear women say, I'm going to just grin and bear it, or I can tough it out, or I just have to get over the hump, or I'll just be miserable for now. I don't understand this assumption that menopause is supposed to be awful. It isn't. There's absolutely no reason that any woman has to be miserable for even a minute with menopause. Instead, women should look forward to menopause as a time when they have experience and wisdom and independence and freedom and options. If you think about it, menopause is the one and only time in your entire life when you can control your hormones. You get to decide how you want to conduct your menopause management. I mean, you had absolutely no control over anything during puberty. I mean, you were still a kid. You weren't sure who you were or what you wanted or how to get anything, even if you did know what you wanted. Pregnancy was even more limiting. You had to